Welcome back to our QuestionPro Fireside Chats. I know we took a week off last week. We had a wonderful X-Day event at the top of the Gherkin here in London, but we are back with you today with a special guest, actually a guest that you might have already seen on the show, Dan Jackson, who runs our Canadian effort here at QuestionPro. And today we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting concept. I think one that I've been thinking about a lot, probably even over the last 10 years or so, right? I mean, we talk so much about big data and how much data is around these days, that it's also worth thinking about, well, where do surveys and survey data what role does survey data play when you have access to so much big data, whether that's behavioral data, purchasing data, email open data. We're tracking everything these days. And it's worth asking the question, where does survey data come into play? So we've got Dan Jackson here, better known as DJ. So you'll be hearing me refer to him as DJ during this show. But we've got DJ here to talk about all of that and give us an answer to that very big question. So DJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks again, Asim, for having me on here. I know it's 3 p.m. where you're at. I know you're probably eager to head off. But I appreciate the time allotted here for the conversation and the fireside chat, which I'm waiting for one day to see that fire appear.
I have set that as a goal. So for our marketing team listening out there, I am expecting some sort of animated fire in the corner here at some point. But no, welcome back. And I think for anybody who picked up on that 3 p.m. comment, typically we don't leave the office at 3 p.m. at QuestionPro, but it is the summertime, and that is one of the perks that we get each year at QuestionPro is we do get half days on Fridays. So, if you've ever thought about coming and working for QuestionPro, that's a perk for you. But that's not the point of this show. The point of this show is to talk all about where data comes into play. DJ, you gave a talk on this earlier this month at a conference in Canada. Is that right? Is that where this kind of topic came from?
Yeah, and I was invited to a conference in Western Canada, and the topics are around data management, big data analytics, data security. And I was kind of an anomaly in there, where survey data is sort of, seen as, the smaller, primary research data doesn't really fit in this. But I was interested in how it actually does. And it got me thinking, as you do, and as we all do, working in a survey company, how this connection actually plays out. So I gave a workshop, and basically the fundamentals of survey research to, data professionals. And it's amazing to see that, many are new to the understanding of the steps it takes to write a good survey project, how surveys can help. And many have the assumptions, including, very smart people, that surveys, are not, as needed as they once were, because of all the streams of data that we have.
Makes complete sense. I know I've been thinking about this. Well, I had thought about this a lot. I mean, I've kind of come up through the entire kind of technology company background, and everything that we worked on, it was you don't need survey data. You just look at real user data, right? If you want to figure out what's a better landing page or what's a better ad copy, it's just throw it out there and see what gets better click-through rates or better conversion rates. And that kind of has its whole ball of ramifications that I think we've kind of learned a decade on. But I think we'll kind of get into some of those things. So from your perspective, what are some of the key differences between using big data and survey data?
The key differences, I would say, obviously the size, like you mentioned, the size of the data, endless, click data from emails, from, online campaigns, purchase data, but also what they say, the 3 V's. So I think it's volume, velocity, and I forget what the other one is, but it's actually, it's, instantaneous data, right? Like it's there with, at the, everybody thinks you can stream it and such. Whereas survey data is a really, not, whereas big data you think is found, you've done it, completed some task, you've done some action, and the behavior data is collected. But with surveys, it's really like a step-by-step process, and it's you actively looking for an answer to a question. So really kind of getting out there and working through. And as you know, as researchers, the act of actually planning a research project and goals around it are so fundamental. And so you want to say the difference is it's a very active process, that research project. It can be for big data, but the search for an answer is really key for survey research.
So what are some of the pros and cons between using, this kind of big data stream that now most companies have access to in some way, shape, or form, versus using survey data? Where would you go in different cases? When is survey data the right method? When is big data the right place to go?
The pros and cons. I'll give you a little example of some survey data that was used beside a bigger, larger data collection set. And I think it'll give you a bit of sort of food for thought of how important the survey data is, and it'll give you the pros and cons of both, I think. So I'll just share my screen here. So last year, or 2021, can you see my, can you see that?
No, I'm not able to. Oh, there it is, coming up.
Cool. So just to highlight this point, big data collected with a social media company we all know set out to get an accurate take on the vaccination or first dose vaccination in the United States. So the CDC is, obviously collecting the data of how many got it, but they wanted a tracking to track the amount got it. So you could also collect demographic information, other sorts of information. So that's, you could imagine a country looking to have that information if they wanted another rollout like this. So the biggest so there was three major waves, or three different companies that reached out that wanted to find out the first dose percentage. One was Facebook at 250,000 each wave. So every month they put out a push poll, basically, of 250. I think the total was 4 million responses. The Census Household Pulse, which is something that the CDC does, it was a smaller wave at 75, and I think that it was up to 1 million, the overall, and then a smallest, which is like sound, which I'll get into, sound market research surveys at 1,000 was the most accurate predictor, and it was actually this highlights what's called the big data paradox. Sometimes the larger the data size, we automatically assume, that's an accurate representation. 4 million people is, the error is very small. But this next slide I'll show you, it breaks down a little, sort of each of the different modes or different data collection methods. And as you can see, the questions are different. The follow-up questions to that questions are different. There's the weighting was different, but obviously the main component was the smaller the data set. And the takeaway from that, from the article, was that there is no real silver bullet why Ipsos was able to almost nail the percentage of first shot people that were vaccinated. I think it was very accurate versus Facebook, which was about 20 points off. So they overestimated people that got the first shot. by 18 points, whereas the smallest data set was off by about 2 points. So why was that? There's really no silver bullet. The article states there was like the design, the question type, the way they recruited the panel members, everything that we're very knowledgeable at our job, and really kind of proves the point that like sound market research trumps big data, or just aiming at collecting all the information you can get. It trumps it any day of the week.
Yeah, it's a good example of the methodology matters, right? That I think, in some cases, like all three of these are kind of surveys, right? It's not like we're looking at behavioral data or something like that. Like these are still asking the question, have you had a COVID-19 vaccination? The thing about Facebook is that it's kind of like, it's like the quick poll, right? It's like when Elon Musk goes to Twitter and is like, hey, let's do a quick poll. Like, should I still be the CEO of Twitter? Yes or no? Fact of the matter is, like, it's just going out into the feed. It's going to get gamed, right? Like, just the fact that you have so much more volume is actually not a good thing, because, the 1,000 per wave that Ipsos did, they're using all of the same methodologies that any market researcher would use for a quant survey, right? Am I getting good data quality? Am I getting a nationally representative sample? Am I making sure that people aren't going in and taking this thing twice or gaming the system? Am I making sure that I'm not getting any sort of demographic bias? And I think none of that was kind of included in Facebook's data. The other sort of tactic that I saw being used in the pandemic, even before people actually just started asking the question, was like Google Trends data, right? Like, oh, are people searching for the symptoms that they had, right? And there was always this like this notion that like, oh, Google can predict a flu outbreak before it even happens, right? Because they're seeing all this kind of search terms, and that's kind of the behavioral big data. It can give you a direction, but it's not going to give you an accurate portrayal of actually how many people are getting sick in that region, right? So there's something to be said about creating kind of a bespoke study where you actually go and ask the question in the right way to the right people. You ensure that you have high data quality, and that will win over just getting as many responses as possible. You don't actually need that many responses to get to statistical significance, right? Like at some point, the more responses you get, it's not actually helping you to get to a better data point, a better end result, right? You've already got statistical significance. Really the difference between getting 5,000 responses and 50,000 responses shouldn't be that much in terms of the actual outcome in the analysis.
Exactly. Another was the sampling frame. So Ipsos, like, really, the recruitment was really, as we understand it in our role, it sometimes can be this very, very tedious, sometimes process of, for instance, 5% of the panelists lacked home internet, but they wanted to capture those people. So they sent them like paper-based, I believe it was. So they wanted to capture like a really good sample, as opposed to just throwing it all out there based on some list that they have.
Yeah. I think the channel that you send it out on really matters, right? And obviously Facebook, like, it has to put it out in their news feed, right? Maybe they could have gone and done something more bespoke where they sent out a survey to the email addresses that they have, and maybe that would have worked better. But I think that's, to me, that's the core in this whole question of big data versus survey data, right? It's like, are you actually using the methodology to answer the question, or are you trying to get something that like kind of represents your question, right? So like in the startup world, we were always taught, don't ask people what they want to see, just put it in front of them and see what they do, right? And so that manifested itself in so many different ways. It was like, okay, if you're going to design a product or a new solution, like come up with the landing page first, and then see what people do on that landing page. What's the click-through rate? What links do they click on next? And so this became this whole ethos, right? Like before you create a product, like there's no need to go do market research or do survey data, throw up a landing page and see what happens. But now, obviously, 10 years later, it's like, well, maybe if you just made the page red instead of blue, people are going to click on it more and be more engaged, right? Because it's the mechanism that you're delivering it in is creating a bunch of bias. Or another one that you'd hear a lot was like, you want to do like a tagline test, right? So, that's something that we do for customers a lot, like a claims test or a tagline test, something like this, copy test. And put it out in the survey. You get out to the right demographics, you see which one they like. Well, a lot of people will tell you, you know what? Just put it into Google Ads and go spend $100 and see which one gets the better click-through rate. Well, the problem is if you put one word in bold, or you use something that's like, that just is there with the internet, right? You talk about something controversial, it's going to get more engagement. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tagline for your product. Right. And now you're seeing this in all of the social media algorithms where it's like, hey, the more this makes you feel mad, the better engagement it's going to get. And so the more I'm going to show this to you. And now we've got a news feed with a bunch of polarizing stuff.
Right.
That I think is a really good example of the risk that you as a brand manager can play going down just the big data path and not using the survey data to actually answer your question. If you're just looking for things like, engagement, or how many times did they click on my link? How long did they spend on my web page? How many things did they buy? There's so much bias in there, right? You're not able to really ask the question in a safe, contained space to really get at the core of the research objective.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So tell us about some other examples that you've got there, DJ.
Yeah, so for errors, I think in errors in big data as well, like you've collected the data, you're about to transform it into some sort of insight, whether it's like transaction, whatever it is, like the span of time after taking is very important. It changes, right? The data could be, coded as something different. It could not match the thing that it was originally intended to. So the bias in that is sort of like the error of not being able to like actually properly define what you have in store. So all this sees, so the guy that I think started BigQuery from Google, he was the lead engineer. He wrote an article recently called Big Data is Dead. And he says why that is, I mean, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing, is that it's really only like a very small amount have really what's called big data, like whether it's like a Gartner, or whether it's a big giant CPG company or conglomerate, they have what's called big data, and they really don't have a plan on actually transforming that into information. And nobody Well, what a survey is, like I go back to the main like kind of argument, is sort of like a survey is a very detective based kind of thing that you're doing. The big data thing, they have all this information. In 5 years, it might not even be worthwhile, or 4 months rather. And so the scare we had in 2013 in market research, I mean, it was like, okay, big data, better hang up the stats courses or whatever, or the survey courses rather, because basically everybody's just going to tell you what they think based on what they've done.
Yeah.
And if fast forward 10 years, we're still here, we're growing, and we're doing it.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's big data is dead. I do. I mean, I think I love it. Right. It's like we really went through this whole phase where like, you're never going to need survey data again. All the data is there. And I think people don't realize like big data is hard, right? Like a few companies that have big data, you just think and you just assume all your answers are in there. Right. And you're like, okay, well, all the data is already collected. The easy part is now just finding out the answer. I think when you really get in there, you realize actually it might just be easier to ask it on a survey and get 300 to 500 people to answer your survey, right? Like hiring a data analyst to then go into this big unstructured set of data that has, hundreds and hundreds of columns and variables and millions of rows. You don't even know what you're looking for. and you're then trying to analyze this data and write SQL queries against it and go through and figure out, okay, did we take out the bias? Are we able to segment the way that we want to? Are we able to then join up different data sets to find the answers that we want to? Oh my gosh, now you've probably just spent like a month with a data architect trying to find an answer that you don't even know exists, when you probably could have just run a survey and had a fraction of the time and resources and gotten a much more clear answer to your question.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. Definitely let us know, everybody out there who's got questions. Feel free to pop them into the comments here in the last 10 minutes as we kind of dive through it. Love to hear your stories out there. If anybody kind of went through the same big data is dead moment. But DJ, are there ways that these two worlds can work together? The big data and the survey data, or are they kind of two separate things? Like, where do they come together? Is big data really dead, or can we use big data to help inform surveys?
Well, there's a few examples that come to mind. I would say no, it's not. Obviously, there's always going to be, we're going to use big data as it's constantly streaming in our lives. We do it every day. One way that's typical of surveys working in unison with big data is sort of like finding writing the right questions is one example. For instance, there's several surveys that are created. It's a pharmaceutical company, and they want to find the true answer that aligns to the right questions that's asked. So if they have monitoring bracelets, and so they can match sort of what actually happened versus the questions that were asked with that data that's pulled from that wearable device, then they can find the right survey and right questions, and just have a better questionnaire that goes out. There's also sort of an example everybody probably know is sort of like, I don't know if you have in the UK, which we're driving, Google will ask, is there a traffic jam, or is there something still there? And sort of it's a push pull where it's asking you, like, is something there, or your opinion on a restaurant.
Right. It's like the Waze type thing.
Yeah. So they use that in sort of a conjunction to sort of, oh, we've asked you, and then it further tells them more information based on the survey and the big data.
That's a good example. So basically, Google or Waze is kind of looking at location data, right? And they're seeing, okay, we've got this many devices on this road going this fast. We think it's a traffic jam or some sort of issue is going on there. That's the big data component. But then the survey component is, well, let's also just ask, right. Is there something there? What's going on? Is it a traffic jam? Is it a car accident? Is there something in the road? Is there a traffic stop? And that's a great example, right? It's this kind of combo. It's this 1-2 punch. And I think you see that with the big data and structured data a lot, is like actually looking at that data probably just creates more questions that then you use the survey data to actually go answer. So like, a good example would be like customer purchasing data. Right. I mean, that's the data that hopefully everybody's got, right? You don't need to be a technology company to know, okay, how many people are sending you payments every single day, or how many, receipts are you pulling out of your system each day. But you might be able to see through your big data that, hey, we're seeing lower and lower amounts of purchases from younger age groups. And you may interpret that as kind of an executive or a stakeholder, and you may say, okay, cool, we've got the answer through our purchasing data, which is we should be targeting older age groups and we should not be targeting younger age groups. Makes sense, right? That seems like, okay, you've got enough data there. You can see the demographics. That seems like a good decision to take. But you don't actually know why, right? Like, why are the younger age groups not buying more? That's the perfect opportunity to then go take that insight from the big data and go figure out the why through the survey data, to go start surveying those younger demographics to understand, is it the wrong product? Is it not branded the right way? Is it not in places that they make purchases? Is it, customer satisfaction issue, a support issue? What's going on there, right? I mean, maybe you make the exact wrong decision to stop targeting younger generations when it was a really easy product fix or a positioning fix or some confusion in the market that you otherwise would have realized by doing some survey data.
Exactly. Lots of opportunities and to continue to use surveys. And I think with the initial example is that what I set out to do was sort of like, okay, I want to give myself sort of some, I hope I'm in the right industry sort of thing, with my career choice. So looking around and seeing like, okay, is this a viable, is surveys going to be out for the 20, 30 years? And I would definitely say yes. I mean, based on sort of the examples that we've shown, but also like, it's always you're always going to ask people, their points of view, their perspective, and you're gonna make inferences from that. You're gonna turn that into insight, and you're gonna need experts who know how to create a research project, a sound research project, to get actual accurate feedback.
Absolutely. I know we're all kind of in this industry and wondering about where it goes in terms of our careers. I remember having this moment early in my career. I was interning at Microsoft, and this was a long time ago, right? Windows Vista was just coming out, if anybody remembers that. And I was put on this testing team for Windows Vista right before it came out. And this team was like relatively new, and their entire job was to just ask the beta testers what they think about Windows Vista. And I'm like, that seems relatively simple. Like, what do you mean this is a new team? Wouldn't you have done this for every release of Windows, like for the past, since Windows was around? And they're like, no, like all we do is we just release this beta, and then all we do is just look at behavioral data. So all we look at is like, are there bug reports, or those little like things when your system crashes, it like automatically sends a report back. That was the only data that they ever looked at. And this is Microsoft. And I think a lot of tech companies kind of take that bias, right? They're like, oh, we don't need to ask. Like, we'll just see it come out in the data, right? We don't actually need to ask. And they finally started asking. And I think this was the moment where I was like, all right, you know what? Actually, behavioral data can tell us some things, but it's actually maybe not the best. And just asking people directly is the best way to do it. It might give us some directional, it might confirm our survey data. But wow, asking sometimes is so easy to do. And we just don't do it enough, right? To just say, you know what, we don't actually need to go and spend hours and hours inspecting big data and running through data science. Just ask, right? It's easy enough these days with surveys. And I know that seems like a plug for QuestionPro, but I think a lot of us go through that journey as to like, oh, let's try to go find it in the data. And I know there's maybe a few data scientists on this call that, yeah, absolutely, you guys know what you're doing and you go for it, but I only know so many SQL prompts, and I think ChatGPT might help us a little bit, but outside of that, it might just be easiest to ask your end consumer on a relatively simple survey.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
I love it. Well, DJ, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you. I hope that everybody had some good ideas there on where to use big data, where to use survey data. We'll be back next week, Friday, and we're going to have a great discussion on eye tracking, bringing some behavioral data into the survey itself with the CEO and founder of Real Eye, Adam Sellery. So join us next week. Thanks again, DJ. Everybody else, have a great Friday, and thanks for joining the show.